When I stepped into the little room, I thought I had come to the wrong place. I have AOADD, Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder. If that sounds made up, it's because it's pretty rare from what I understand. Most people get ADD when they're kids, but very few of them are diagnosed once they're my age. In fact, it's something like 1% of people from what I understand. When I was a kid, I was never prone to any of the hyperactivity or attention problems that my peers had. I never needed medication or structure to help me pay attention while I was in class. I did really well in school and did really well in my working life, right up until I was about 34. Then suddenly, I had the hardest time paying attention. I couldn't focus on much of anything, not even for the short term. I would find my mind wandering while I was at work, and eventually, I got fired. I couldn't concentrate long enough on my work to get anything done. I tried to find another job, but anything I managed to get ended the same way. I couldn't even pay attention long enough to flip hamburgers, and my resume was soon in shambles. At home, I struggled to relate to my family. Television shows, sporting events, the day-to-day things no longer held my attention. I was aware of this, aware that I was losing my wife and kids, but I couldn't pay attention to that either. It was like being trapped just behind your eyes and having to watch as you lose everything. After my wife left and took the kids, I decided it might be time to go see a doctor. This was a little different than just the general malaise that I sometimes found with life, and I needed help. My doctor told me about the Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder and prescribed medication and some supplements. He helped me fill out the paperwork and get on disability. The disability paid for my housing. My wife had taken our house in the divorce, and the disability made them go easy on me when it came to child support. I wasn't just a lazy slob, I had a medical condition, and I was trying to overcome it. None of the medication worked, the supplements either, and nothing they suggested seemed to help with my attention problems. After a while, my doctor recommended a support group, and I told him I'd give it a try. When I came to my first session, I wasn't sure that I had made the right call. The meeting room was covered with pictures of a man, hand drawings, and police sketches, all of them with the caption, "Have you seen this man?" I wondered who he was, the whole thing feeling a bit tinfoil hattish, but I had to admit that the man looked a little familiar. I was still staring at him when the organizer called me out, looking up when the man asked if I had AOADD. When I told him I did, he nodded and told me I was in the right place. So I took a seat with the other 5 or 6 people there and decided to give it a try. "So, why don't you tell us about your trigger moment?" "My what?" I asked, not sure what he was talking about. "Your trigger moment. Everyone in the group has one. It's the moment you realize that you had a problem with attention. It'll sound a little weird, but it may surprise you to learn that a lot of our trigger moments are very similar." I thought about it, like really racking my brain, but I couldn't come up with much of anything. My doctor had never said anything about a trigger moment, and this was something new. My attention issues had just kind of happened, and I couldn't think of anything that had caused it. The man leading the meetings, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair, nodded and said that was normal. "Charlie," he said, looking at a bearded guy who was dressed like somebody's dad at an amusement park, "why don't you talk about your trigger moment? Maybe it'll help him figure it out." Charlie nodded, interlocking his fingers as he put them across his lap. "I was walking down Main Street when a man suddenly called out to me from a nearby park bench. He asked if I would mind giving him my attention, just like that, and I nodded, saying I would. I figured he just wanted money. Most of the guys that call out to you from park benches want money. But after I agreed to give him my attention, he nodded and just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird, wondered what the hell that had been about, but as I walked, I realized I couldn't focus on the fantasy football team I had been planning. I'd been thinking about the game coming up. I was really big into fantasy football back then, and the team I had put together was doing really well. I had been going over my roster for next week. My team was about to go into the semifinals, and it was weird to realize that the roster would no longer hold my attention. I just kind of wandered around, not really thinking about anything in particular. That's how it started. After that, I couldn't really pay attention to anything. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and now I just kind of float around most of the time. That trigger moment, the moment in time when I met the man, seems to be the only thing I can really concentrate on anymore. I can remember it with crystal clarity, but everything else is like catching water in a sieve. I can think about something for a moment or two, maybe even for as long as a half an hour, but eventually, it's gone. I live out of a van now. You might have seen it when you pulled up to the rec center, and I only have it because the guy took my money and handed me the keys, and I didn't have to sign anything. It's not registered. The cops have ticketed me 12 times or more, and it's only a matter of time before they take that too, I guess. The group nodded at him like this was the most normal thing they had ever heard, and when they all looked at me expectantly, as if I had my own story to tell, I just shook my head. There was something, though, a tickling in the back of my mind, but nothing yet. "Melissa, why don't you go next?" He never asked a question, never asked people if they wanted to share, and all of his statements were just that. He wasn't asking them if they wanted to put their story out there. He was telling them that it was time to share information. I was working as a waitress at a lunch counter. It was the middle of the day, the lunch rush was in full swing, and I barely even looked at the guy when he came and sat down at the counter. I walked over and asked if I could get him something. He said all he wanted was my attention, just a little attention. When I said he had it, he just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird. The guy had wanted my attention and then he left, but that was how it started. I'm not quite as bad as some of the people in the group. I can still hold on to my attention for about 40% of the time. Sometimes, however, I'll just lose all ability to pay attention to anything. My doctor recommended this group, thinking it might stop it from getting worse, but I think it's as bad as it'll ever get. After all, the man only asked for a little of my attention, not all of it. I stopped her after that, asking if she was serious. She said she was, and I looked at the group organizer with a raised eyebrow. "Are you trying to tell me that these two had their attention stolen by, what, some kind of demon or something?" The organizer shook his head emphatically. "No, not a demon. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe in this man and what he's doing. I don't know what he is, some highly persuasive psychic, some kind of creature from outside our reality, or just some Orwellian thought criminal who's figured out how to perpetrate the worst crime imaginable. But he is the string that holds everyone together, and he seems to like this area the best." I got up, meaning to leave, but the organizer stopped me with a few words. "You met him too, didn't you?" I had my hand on the door, but his statement had made me think again about where I had seen the man on the poster. "I saw you recognizing him when you came in. Everyone does, but they don't always remember right away. He's sneaky, a very easy-to-miss man. He's so unassuming that you never think twice about giving him your attention. It's just a turn of phrase, after all. 'May I have your attention, please?' But he means it literally. They never realize what they're giving up when they agree to give him their attention, but he knows full well what he's taking." I was still at the door, my hand around the knob. Even though I didn't believe what he was saying, I couldn't deny one thing. I did recognize the man in the picture. I just couldn't remember where. "Larry, why don't you tell your story next? You should have a seat and listen. Larry has a real harrowing tale." I took my seat, curiosity getting the better of me, and looked at Larry as he looked at his cheap Walmart shoes instead of the group. Larry reminded me of the dad from The Honeymooners, an older guy in the comfortable overweight of age. His head was bald, except for a scattering of peach fuzz on top, and I noticed there was a long scar on his left arm that he kept covered with the sleeve of his shirt. There was enough sleeve to do the job. He was wearing a sweatshirt even in the unseasonable heat, but he seemed inadvertently to pluck at it. It was as if the scar itched him, and he needed to scratch it. I was a bus driver for the city. I've been a bus driver for 25 years. I knew my job, I knew my route, and if I'd been a little luckier, I was only about 5 years away from a really good retirement. I was taking on afternoon fares, greeting people as they put in their change and coins in the little slot. When he got on, I told him it was $1.50 to ride the bus, and it was change only. He asked me something, and at the time, I thought he had asked if I had a quarter. Sometimes they didn't have enough, and they asked if they could borrow a quarter or a dime. I told him sure, digging around in my pockets to see if I had some change. But when I looked up with a couple of dimes, the guy was gone. I didn't think anything of it, just slapped the change in the box and got on my way. As I drove, however, I found my attention waning. I couldn't really focus on any one particular thing. I was just looking everywhere, having trouble remembering what I'd been doing. I crashed that bus into rush hour traffic, causing one of the biggest accidents in the city's memory at the time. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but there was enough property damage and medical expenses that the city had little choice but to fire me. I got a portion of my retirement, but nowhere near what I would have got after retiring with the full 30. I feel terrible for what I did, but even that seems to be dulled by the fact that I can't seem to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. I have to write down these meetings on a whiteboard so I can even remember that I have to go to them at all. If it wasn't for Kay here, calling us on meeting days and coming to pick us up, most of us wouldn't be here at all. Kay, the organizer, looked back at me and seemed to be inviting me to tell my own story. I still couldn't remember all the details, but something was starting to come back as I listened to them tell their stories. I had been going to get coffee for my boss and some of my friends in the office. They had given me their order, and I had gone to Keeger Coffee to get some Joe. I had been coming back with the cardboard container of coffee, the one for me, balanced in my other hand, when someone had asked if they could have my attention, please. I turned, looking at the guy as he stood on a box with a small crowd gathered around him. It wasn't many, maybe 5 or 6 people, including me, but as he asked the question again, a few of them nodded. Found myself nodding along with them. Kay was right. The question was so harmless that I hadn't thought twice about agreeing to it. It seemed that even a nod was good enough. After 3 or 4 of the people had nodded and stepped in closer, he clapped his hands and stepped down off the box. Then, to the general confusion of the crowd, he simply walked away. Looking at the group again, I realized that one of the people from the crowd was sitting there, and they seemed to have remembered me as well. He was on a street corner, a guy standing on a soapbox. He called for everyone's attention, and a few of us gave it to him. I walked off after he left, not thinking anything of it, but that was when it all started. The guy I'd recognized from the crowd was nodding along, looking around as if to show people that he wasn't crazy. Kay was nodding too, and when he spread his hands out, everyone grasped hands, and I found myself joining them. Kay clearly was no victim of the man, and I wondered what his connection was to all this as he reaffirmed to all of us that we were okay, and that it was going to get better. I'm glad that you remembered the man and the moment you lost your attention to him. When I started this group 3 years ago, with Larry there, I knew there would be others. I want to help, I want to heal, and I want to be here for all of you in your time of need. There were nods, some of them thanking him, but I was still curious as to why. Why? If he hasn't affected you, then why do you care? I said, as all of them looked at me. Kay nodded, having expected this. Though I still have my attention, I can assure you that I too have been affected by this man. My father lost his attention to him, you see, about 25 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school. My father accidentally gave his attention to this man, as he stood at a bus stop a few blocks from here. He told anyone who would listen about the man who had only asked for his attention, screamed it from his bed in the mental hospital, but no one believed him. No one besides me, that is. I've been looking for evidence for years, something to justify my father's stories, and the more of you that I find, the more evidence I get of the man and his existence. I'm so proud of you, of all of you, for being brave enough to come here today and share your stories. They all started to clap, but I didn't join in. So what do we do now? I asked, as the applause died down. Kay cocked a head at me. What do you mean? I mean, if we know this man is stealing our attention, then why don't we find him and get it back? The others shook their heads, and I realized I probably wasn't the first person to think of that. Kay sat back, shaking his head morosely, and told me to put the idea out of my mind. But why? We can find him. You said he likes to hunt in this area, so why don't we just go after him? Because no one who tries ever finds him, or they never come back. They either fail to find him and go crazy trying to get back what they lost, or they find him and he does something to them. Maybe having their attention gives him some kind of power over them. Maybe he just does something worse to them. No one knows. This group is a safe place, a support group for those who are suffering from what he did to them. I never wanted to see anyone else live the way my father did, strapped to a hospital bed so he wouldn't wander off and hurt himself. I help people who have been hurt by the man, helping them lead a normal life. Well, as normal a life as they can. I feel that it's my sacred duty to help people, to try and get something back after what he's taken from them. But there's no getting back what he's taken. I hope you'll join us in that. There is, after all, safety in numbers. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and as I said my goodbyes and watched Kay pack up the snacks, I covertly took one of the photos off the wall. I know he said that once I remembered, the memory would be crystal clear, but I didn't want to risk forgetting what this guy looked like. I can't share in Kay's optimism, and I can't stand by and do nothing if this man is the one who has affected my life in such a way. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me. I'll tattoo it on the back of my hand if I have to, so I can force myself to concentrate anytime I begin to slip. I will find this man, this strange creature who steals what is most important to us, and I will have my attention back, or die trying. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.